네, 그럼 저희 크루즈
Welcome back. We are going to begin our panel discussion session. Thank you very much. Big thank you to the two presenters. Well, I thought that we were not fully prepared for the online presentation, so we had to change the order to listen to the Korean case. But anyway, thanks to both of the presentations, now we have a better understanding of the Chinese market. And Gigi Wei had to excuse herself. If you have any questions, please make sure you give those questions to us so that we can share these questions with her. And after the presentation, representing the industry, academia, and terminals, we have about 5 people representing all different sectors. So why don't we start with the industry, followed by academia and the government. First, we have, as our panelist on my left, we have Senior Manager Yoon Hyo-jin of Costa Cruise. Senior Manager Yoon has been working in the cruise industry for 17 years, and when I said 17, she was worried that she might look old. So she has 17 years experience and 6 years experience with Costa Cruise. So she has a great understanding of the Korean market, and I believe that she can share with us the current status of the cruise industry with the Korean participants, maybe 5 to 7 minutes, please.
네, 안녕하세요.
Good afternoon. I'm with Costa. I indeed appreciate the two presentations, and I had the experience of running both homeport and interport. So we've been engaged in running both homeport and interport starting from Busan and Pohang this year and continuing that in the next year. In Sokcho, Busan, and Pohang, we will accommodate about 30,000 passengers according to our plan. So if you think about the contemporary cruise, like my organization, in selecting a home port, there are 2 major criteria. First one is the berthing capability. Second, you have to have a large enough infrastructure or the terminal to make sure that turnarounds can be done swiftly. And also, you have to consider whether this accommodates the market demand. So the market that I'm talking about is, let's say that there is a cruise ship that departs from Busan. Then 70% of the local demand should be able to accommodate it by this home port, and the rest 30% would be a flying cruise. So first we have to consider whether the market exists. So do we have the 70% of the market demand? I believe this is the requirement, or this is the condition that is very difficult to meet in Korea. So in the case of cruise, we say that supply drives demand, and that's actually what's happening in the market. And like we saw in China 16 years ago when Global Cruise Line entered this Northeast Asian market, well, we were wondering how we can create port of calls. And at the time, China was keen in developing home ports, and it enjoyed huge support from the government as well. So now, the demand in terms of market demand, it is the top 2 market around the world, and now it has the nationally flagged cruise ship. And China is also capable of building cruise vessels. But in the case of Korea, unfortunately, we're not quite different from what it was like 16 years ago, and currently we're more focused on port of calls capabilities rather than creating a home port. So the importance of a home port is not being stressed enough. In attracting home ports, of course, it is important to attract various businesses and industries. And in order to attract a home port, we need to have the right market that has sufficient demand. So from different perspectives, well, given these conditions, I believe that the port of Busan can be the right candidate to be a home port because of its tourism infrastructure and its accessibility to major cities, including the metropolitan cities of Korea. And also, foreign tourists can enjoy the infrastructure in Busan and take the cruise ships, just like what happens in Singapore. So at the national level, in the long run, we should shift our focus from port of calls to the creation of a home port in the long run. So maybe that was, maybe I spent too much time. Thank you.
아마 이제 글로벌 선사 입장에서 뭐가
From the perspective of a global cruise line, what would be the criteria and the potential of a home port? Thank you for the input.
모신 분은
Next up is from Princess Cruise. Princess Cruise and Costa Cruise are a little bit different. Ms. Yoon has described Costa Cruise as contemporary cruise. Princess Cruise, on the other hand, well, Ms. Kim Yeon-kyung has about 16-year experience in the cruise business. Princess Cruise back in 2013 with Kinetic Cruise. Princess Cruise opened a Korean branch office and she has been with the office. And then recently she has expanded her work to cover in the entire Asia. So this is a different cruise shipping company and an outbound cruise company. So could you help us better understand the Korean cruise market? Good afternoon. I am Kim Yeon-kyung from Princess Cruise and Kinet Line. I am in charge of marketing. And Princess Cruise in 1965 began its business. It is an international global company and operates a premium line of cruises. Ms. Yoon earlier mentioned the home port conditions that need to be met, and I would like to focus more on something more grounded and something that we can all sense very keenly. The expression home port. Well, before we mention home port, I think we need to just let go of the grand goals. Why don't we focus more on a better prepared port? For instance, I love all Korean ports. I don't have any preference for one port or another. I just want to present my ideas for total development and overall improvement. So this year, I used my own cruise line, traveling to Japan, and then we returned to Jeju port. As I entered the port, based on my experience, I want to describe what happened. Jeju port has the infrastructure for international cruise lines, so international cruise ships do call to Jeju port. But before that, before being a destination port or a home port, I called to many Japanese ports before reaching Jeju. And when I got off in Gangjeong port, in order to reach the immigration office, you have to walk through a flat escalator for about a kilometer. So that length, when you walk through that length, is very, very far. So many cruise travelers are healthy, but there are seniors and there are people who cannot really walk that long. So 1.3 kilometers of walking is very exhausting. So when I was walking on that walk, I really thought about a lot of things. It is not just a single structure, but I wish that the terminal would install a large screen to promote Jeju so that the process can be more enjoyable, to look at the history of Jeju, for example, or maybe we can show BTS videos, or we could install some representative Jeju structures so that the passengers would have a better impression of Jeju once they get off the ship. And through the moving sidewalk, I reached the port, and then I met very violent taxis. So to passengers who get off the cruise ships, of course, Jeju is not a very approachable place, and so taking advantage of this lack of accessibility, the drivers were really ripping off really the passengers, charging them excessive prices and really almost threatening the passengers that they couldn't get anywhere without getting on the taxis. And the driver said, "You have 5 passengers, so you have to pay 10,000 won more." When 2,000 passengers get off the cruise ship and they meet the Korea for the first time, that's the first impression they're getting. And there can be a lack of auxiliary facilities as well. Although Jeju has a beautiful port terminal, there was nothing inside to provide an information of what people can do in Jeju. There was a very small information desk, and there was just one staff at the desk. But if I recall the ports in Japan, there were many staff members promoting Japan and selling souvenirs and guiding the tourists. So that was a big contrast. As cruisers visit a number of different ports in a series, this comparison comes very directly. And it is not just confined to Jeju. I'm just taking Jeju as an example based on my experience. It's the same situation for all other ports. When cruises berth, there is always a welcome event for the passengers. When passengers enter Jeju for the first time, they feel how welcoming it is, and they need to be motivated to want to find out more about Jeju. And because the berth is too high, when the cruise calls to port, it can be very tricky because it takes more 30 minutes or an hour's delay for the ship to berth. So it takes a long time for the passengers to get off the ship, and that means less time for them to tour the city. And it takes a very long process to get out of the port. And so passengers really, along the way, lose that desire to find out more about Jeju. And they're too exhausted by the time they get out of the port. They're not willing to do anything else. For instance, the closest port in Japan, such as in Nagasaki, Kobe, or Osaka, in these ports, once the ship berths, there are many different infrastructures in place. So from the port, it takes a very short time to get to the city. The passengers can get out of the port in no time and reach the city. And in the case of Osaka, there's the Universal Studios, which is very nearby the port. And our company allows for the ships to call to port until late into the night. And so there's ample time for the tourists to enjoy the theme park and return to the ship. And for the port in Kobe, I know there are many people who take air travel, but they do go to Mosaic malls, for instance, and the mall is located at Optimal Place. It's a short cab ride away. You can go to the mall and enjoy everything. And the tourist destinations are very accessible. So I think this is a very good benchmark for Korean ports because, relatively speaking, when cruise passengers get off onto Korean ports, the way they have to use to reach the city is quite limited, and it takes a long time. And because of lack of information, they don't know what to use and what to see in Korea. So for a port to really establish itself as a home port and to play its role as a destination, then the passengers need to want to come. It should be attractive enough for global cruise shipping companies to Busan, Jeju, Incheon, and more ports would want to call to those ports. So this is where we need to be more realistic and think about where we need to do better. and focus on those areas. As a global international shipping company, the importance of port facilities is captured very quickly by our company and monitored constantly. So the ports in Korea, their level compared to other global ports and their location, the level of reception of passengers, these are areas we need to work more on. And this year's WOF topic is blue technomy. And in terms of technology, cruise is a very relevant industry because in 2024 and 2025, for the first time as a cruise shipping company, we will be bringing on board Princess cruise ship that uses LNG for the first time in the world. This means that in all areas, of course, being greener is an imminent task. And in traveling, we need to lead the way for eco-friendly tourism. One of the destinations is Alaska. To take an example, because Alaska is the place you go for the grand nature. Because of pollution, the glaciers are melting very quickly and disappearing. And when you want to travel Alaska, the means of transport needs to consider and be considerate for the destination of Alaska. And that's why shipping companies are taking this into account and doing its research. The speed of the ship has to be very low for Alaska because of the marine organisms, to protect the marine organisms from the ship. And so by combining leading technology inside and on the ship for cruise ships, we do need to make sure that when large ships want to call to Korean ports, we need to make sure that the ports are very popular and that people compete to come. And the insight from experts, I think, should be heeded to, and we need to work little by little to make things better. Thank you.
연기 실장님, 아마 김양지 실장님은
Yes, Ms. Kim works for a global cruise company, and whether home port or destination port, the first facility you see when you get off the ship is the terminal. So the level of services at the terminal is very important, as we heard, and she took some real examples. And in connection to the blue technomy, she also mentioned the technologies of cruises as well. Thank you.
처음에는 이제 제가 잠시 터미널 얘기를 했는데요.
I briefly mentioned the terminal and representing this terminal technology from online. We have this person joining us from online. We have the CEO, Valery Nagorny of Vladivostok Sea Terminal, and he's joining us on online. You can see him, right? Good afternoon, CEO Valery Nagorny. Welcome, and quick introduction. So let me quickly introduce you to the audience. Well, he has more than 18 years of experience serving as the head of strategy planning department at Vladivostok Commercial Port, and he is the CEO of Vladivostok Sea Terminal LLC. And he also served as the CEO of Property and Facility Management Company of the port. I understand that he has great understanding of the Korean market, and the floor is yours for the next 5 or 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you hear me well? Do you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Sorry. Please advise, do you hear me well?
네, 죄송합니다.
Yes, we hear you well. We hear you. So you can start your remarks.
Good afternoon for all industry colleagues. and particularly to Miss Anna, who is our good friend, long-term friend. I have some remarks about home porting strategy for Korean ports, and also considering our plans as a main Russian Pacific cruise ports. So first of all, I want to mention that big work was done regarding construction and developing of Korea cruise terminals. So it's very important thing. And also a lot of work was done by Korean market industry players like Lotte Tour Development and also Costa Korea office to encourage Korean source market. And this is also a very important point. So we fully support such policy. I mean, to transfer from transit cruise ports to home porting operations. And I'd like to mention that we, together with our colleagues from Sokcho port, have got a very interesting case of success when from 2016 till 2019 there were a lot of cruises home porting in Sokcho port and calling to Vladivostok, and those business was very profitable, we know, for Korean cruise operators. But now the only problem that there is no cruise ship which is operated by Korean or Russian operators that can be used to relaunch cruises between Korea and Vladivostok before pandemic, because international cruise lines cannot link us for a while, but demand, potential demand is quite huge, and because of geographical, historical, economical ties between Korea and Russia. And we see this potential considering the ferry line between Donghae port and the Vladivostok port, and the occupancy of the ferry is quite well. So we just have a ferry day today, about more than 400 passengers embarked on the ferry, and now they're sailing to Donghae port. So that is why I know, and we have negotiations with some of market players, and they want to have cruise ships chartered or purchased to meet this demand for cruises between Korea and Russia. And this will be for sure mutually interesting, because guests from both markets can be sourced, I mean, both from Korean and Russian market. So both ports in Korea and Vladivostok will be developed as home ports. So once again, the only problem is capacity and the appropriate ship. Now we had some negotiations with Russian federal travel agencies, and they advised us that they can provide passengers not only from far eastern regions of Russia, but also from western part of Russia to be embarked on the ship here in Vladivostok and for sailing to Korea and neighboring countries. And so this is about Korea-Russian perspective. Regarding for China-Russia itineraries, we also had successful experience before 2020, before pandemic, we had 2 calls of Royal Caribbean with almost 5,000 passengers on each ship. So now, considering that China now has got their own cruise fleet, we suggested to new Chinese cruise companies to launch itineraries between Chinese ports and Vladivostok, not only as cruise destination but also for partial turnaround, targeting Russian source market. This is maybe how to say things from market perspective. Technically, I want to mention that during previous years we have there were construction of electricity facilities along our berths. Now we have electricity facilities to provide shore power for cruise ships as well. So I know that maybe 1 megawatt of electricity power we can provide. So if some of cruise lines will need shore power facility, and I want to mention that now we have such option as well. So maybe this is my all remarks for this time. Thank you for attention.
네, 좋은 말씀 너무 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for the great remarks. Well, between Korea and Russia, the potential of a home port and market potential that was mentioned, and also the cruise vessels and nationally flagged ships and the success case, including Chinese, and how Russian and Chinese markets can grow and what would be the issue. Well, thank you for the remarks.
제가 다음으로는 이제
And up next, I would like to turn to the academia from Pukyong National University. From the Department of Tourism Management, we have Professor Yang Wee-ju, who also leads the Global Tourism Institute at PKNU. He is also a policy advisor to the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, and in 2021, when the Master Plan for Cruise Comprehensive Development was set out, he also was a part of that, and he has a high level of understanding of the coastal and marine tourism. Hello, I am Yang Wee-ju from PKNU, as introduced. The second presenter from China was a researcher named Ji Jiahui. I do read and understand Chinese, so I was following her presentation, and she used a POP 4. I got a POP 4 application, and I was able to translate the PowerPoint immediately, the Papago app, and I was very surprised with the Papago's ability to translate immediately. So I think that international conference will be more and more determined by what is discussed rather than who comes. So we heard from 2 presentations and 3 panels. From policy perspective, I want to share a few thoughts because number one, as the moderator has mentioned, in 2021, the Busan Cruise Industry Comprehensive Development Plan was set up, and I was able to take stock of the challenges and the current state of cruise tourism in Korea. So I want to share my thoughts on that. As you are well aware, in Korea, ports with experience of receiving international cruise ships, those with dedicated international cruise piers, there are only 5: Busan, Jeju, Incheon, Yeosu, and Sokcho. And this year's Hosan is setting up plans to develop itself as a home port for international cruise ships. And these 6 municipalities have proposed policies to become a home port rather than a destination port. And if you look at those reports, the strategies are quite similar. These are local governments and cruise forums. I've read through the main documents and found that there are 2 main issues. Number 1, what is discussed at these forums are about marketing and then also about building infrastructure. And with regard to marketing, most is about the cruise ships, international events, travel agencies, buyers, how to attract them, and to give a seminar. And networking with various international cruise companies, how to attract cruise tourists, and tourism in the destination ports. And for infrastructure, this involves home port infrastructure, development, international shipping company, ship company establishment. So this is really much geared towards hardware, whereas marketing is more about software. And what we need to focus on here in relation to marketing is that the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism and the regional tourism organization office takes the lead, but for infrastructure, the leader of infrastructure is the port authorities or the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries. So the problem is in attracting cruise international tourists. If the target is to be home port, the lead is MOF, and if the target is to attract tourists, then the lead is Ministry of Sports, Tourism and Culture. So among different ministries, the coordination and governance needs to be done better. So I think that going forward, we need a strategic approach. Last year, at the 16th WOF, the Oceans and Leisure director from the MOF said that in 2023, the 5-year cruise development plan will be set up, and this January, the cruise industry development basic plan was announced. This 5-year statutory plan has a vision of easily accessible and enjoyable daily cruise. There are 3 main targets. 300 attraction of 300 cruise ships, 100,000 domestic tourists, international or national national shipping companies, establishing a national shipping company in Korea. In relation to being a home port, nothing is mentioned in this master plan. So as we discuss strategies of a home port today, well, this really does not have anything in the national strategy, so I'm not sure what the point is. But if you look at China, there are many strategies to develop home ports. One such strategy is that to set up such strategies, cruises and the national level of development is analyzed. China divides the growth phase into 3 steps: early stage, fast growth stage, and mature stage. So you need to specify and break down the growth phases. And to back up those stages, you need statistic evidence. And I think this approach is very systematic and impressive. So in relation to a home port, we do need to set up a national strategy quickly. And if we may look to China, I think there are 2 things to learn. First, We need full research for the level of development for the cruise industry that fits the Korean situation. And number two, we want to develop the cruise industry, but we need to take a look and analyze the cruise ecosystem in Korea. And as an industry, what is the level of competitiveness and what is the relevance of cruise industry with other industries? So we need to analyze this type of things in a scientific manner. And also, to build this ecosystem, we need to first have a very clear set of value chain in the cruise industry. So these three things need to be presented in the national strategy. Without the national strategy, MOLIT, or Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, the biggest challenge of MOLIT is, of course, we all think that number one port in Korea is Incheon. And Busan is going to build a new airport in Kadokdo to win the bid to host the World Expo. So these are the two main ports, but the ministry, I think, thinks otherwise. International port would be number one, and all the other airports are highly likely to be perceived as a regional airport by the ministry. I mention this because in a national home port strategy, prioritization is absolutely important. In provincial areas, there are so many international airports in Korea, but they fail to attract users. And they are recording huge deficits and taking a blow to the local government finances. So the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, I think, need to hurry up and release a national home port strategy. And for the home ports that these 6 ports are aiming for, we need a very clear strategic priority to be set forth to focus the development effort. And next, in relation to international cruise, in the tourism area, there are 2 major issues arising. Number one, sustainability and over-tourism. Number 2, regarding carbon neutrality, the eco-friendly measures. And there's nothing about these matters when it comes to the cruise industry. So at the 17th World Oceans Forum, these topics are not addressed, but I hope that starting next year, we could discuss something like this at the policy level, and I hope to see more presentations. And today, as the moderator has mentioned, at the World Ocean Forum, this is the 3rd cruise session that we're having. And I think we have stuck to the overview so far, but starting next year, I hope to dive into greater detail of cruises. The key word for this year's WOF is Blue Technomy. And reading through the material, the most often used word is green, smart, and technology. And I'm sure that these key words can be combined to the cruise industry, and this is one of the topics that I hope to discuss in greater detail starting from next year, so that the session participants can have a more richer session. It was an honor to be a part of this forum. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. So I think you made 3 main points. So number 1, home port national policy must be in place. This year's the 2nd the port development plan lacks anything about home ports. So the government policy needs to reflect home port strategies. Number 2, again, very important. In the global cruise issues, The environment and sustainability are very important issues nowadays, and we need to reflect that into cruise industry development. So sustainability. And a natural segue would be the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries. We do have a director here.
해양
From the Leisure Tourism Division of the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, we have Mr. Kwon. And he became the chief of this division back in 2022, so I believe that you have a great understanding of cruise. Good afternoon, my name is Kwon Yoon-gyu, head of the Tourism Division of the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries. I took office back in December 2022, so maybe it was not, my expertise is not sufficient to talk about this issue. But anyway, listening to presentations and the comments from the previous panelists and presenters, well, it was a great opportunity to learn and think about what we should be pursuing going forward. Thinking back on what happened in 2014 and 15, that was when cruise was expanded. At the time, we had cruise-related legislations and the Comprehensive Plan Act. And also, we saw the expansion of the infrastructure for cruise. And the Ministry of Culture and Sports was interested in this as well. And according to data, well, for instance, per capita spend was about 1 million won. So we believed that this can lead to more investment. But after that, we had this the outbreak of the pandemic. So timing-wise, we believe that we was not in the best position to make the investment. But thankfully, now we see the resumption of cruise journeys starting from March. And I believe that we have this great opportunity to expand our cruise industry once again. And when it comes to the budget, and with the resumption of cruise services, well, there are many players that are interested and paying attention to this business. But when it comes to the necessity having investment, well, this might need more reviews because we have to consider over-tourism and etc. So we started to analyze this issue, and on the basis of the results, we will plan and execute our budgets accordingly. So regarding that, we have people representing the industry and academia. I would like to look forward to your cooperation. And regarding the infrastructure, well, we saw the expansion of the infrastructure start in the beginning of the 2010. So it doesn't really mean that we have the up-to-date infrastructure. And we got some great insight from the team lead of Princess Cruise, for instance. So regarding this, we will talk with the port authority so that we can come up with ways to make it more attractive to our tourists. And also regarding the support of the relevant ministry, which is the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism. But regarding the necessity and the effects, once we have all this data and study all this related data, we believe that we will have firmer ground. And also we have to consider demand. 70% of demand has to be consumed by the local passengers, and the remaining 30, should be accommodated by foreign travelers. That's why we have all these promotional activities. With the resumption of cruise services, well, these were well received by the media as well. So, apart from the 2 cruise itineraries starting from Sokcho, there were these other tourist products that were quite popular. And one of my friends wanted to join this itinerary, but he couldn't get the ticket because it was sold out. So I believe that on the basis of this analysis, we can talk about more concrete investment plans. And also about collaboration. We looked at the case of China, and we also heard remarks from Russia. So through ACC and ENG Club, we continue to have these discussions. And back in July, we had Jeju International Cruise Forum, and we are continuing our talks with cruise players because in order to promote this industry, we will need international collaboration with foreign ports and foreign cruise lines. So one of my colleagues is in Hong Kong at the moment to collaborate as well. So we will be working together to have this international partnership. Thank you.
감사합니다.
Thank you. I understand that the government is putting lots of thoughts into this business, and the government is paying attention to this situation with the resumption of the cruise business back in March. And I understand that we still have issues at hand. Professor Shim already mentioned how governance matters. And also Mr. Kwon mentioned the role of the government and the role of the Port Authority. So it was all meaningful messages from all the presenters and panelists. Well, I don't think we have sufficient time, even though I understand that we have so much to talk about. So is there anything that you need to add? Or maybe we can open the stage to take questions from the floor. So maybe we have a quick time for Q&A. Do we have any questions from the floor?
Yes, please. And please state your name and affiliation. Hello. I am Park In-sun, CEO of Prince Star Line. I'd like to thank Professor Shim. You presented conditions to become a home port, but perhaps I didn't understand why should ports be a home port. I didn't really understand that part. And as Ms. Yoon has mentioned from Costa, there are 1 or 2 home ports fully functioning in Korea. But once a port becomes a home port, what are the economic benefits? Because that's not very clear. In the case of chartered cruises, the benefit I think is quite limited. There can be some immigration procedures at the terminal. Well, maybe that could lead to some profit, but I don't think destination ports. I think that destination ports can even bring bigger profit through restaurants and some other benefits through the tourism industry. But there is no flying-in cruise in Korea, and nobody even goes to the duty-free market. So I don't think being a home port is really practically profitable. So I think that's a limit of a chartered cruise. Perhaps all the crew could deboard and get on board the ships, and their consumption could help the hinterlands. But I think this is an area that we need to focus on. And then you also said the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries and the Ministry of Culture and Sports and Tourism, their budget is quite different, 1.2 trillion won to 100 million won. And Professor Yang from PKNU, you said that the home port is an area of MOF and the tourism is an area of MOCT. So I think that the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism should take the lead overall by coordinating this. I think that the Tourism Act, the cruise development plan could be in line. So the bottleneck to international cruise ships is running casinos. And perhaps we can find the solution to this. Rather than leaving everything up to the MOF, I think the work should be placed with the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. And Ms. Yoon from Costa Cruise. Even if the charter cruise is in place, most of the passengers are Koreans. About 2,700 to 800 are Koreans. In the case of Costa Serena, then do you think there's a need to shift the focus of the program to more Korea-oriented, the food, the programs, and everything, and even the newspapers that are provided on the ship is not Korean newspapers? For instance, rather than just providing too much services for foreign passengers, why don't you focus more on Korean passengers? Rather than giving English performances, you could perhaps hire Korean performers or singers, Korean singers. It might be more enjoyable for the Korean passengers. Thank you.
네, 질문 감사합니다. 제가 조금 다 들어듣.
Thank you. I think you had two comments for Professor Shin and Ms. Yoon. To Professor Shin, I think you were saying that national ships can be more economically beneficial than chartered ships. Is that correct? Yes. And Professor Shim, your comments to that question?
예,
Thank you for the good question. It's not just about cruise, but for other industries as well. Well, we have this development stages. Up until now, the government has made investments to create a cruise port. So it's just like a parking lot that we have. And we're saying that you can come in because we have this parking lot. And at the point, we're thinking of how to run this parking lot. So at the national level, yes, we do have a parking lot that is created with the support of the government money. And when it comes to how to utilize it, we do not have a plan. That's why we have a discussion like this one to talk about the importance of a home port. So why is a home port important? Well, if it becomes a cruise port, well, we did have cruise-related industry, but during the pandemic, everything was destroyed. But in the case of Taiwan and Singapore or Japan or China, they have national vessels, national ships. So on the basis of these vessels, even though they were not active, they did carry on their business. So we can't really guarantee that there is no other pandemic. And does that mean that we should let ourselves keep failing every time? Once we are equipped with our national vessels, then we can have the ecosystem. And regarding how to utilize this parking lot that we have, the best way is to run the national vessels. And who will be operating the vessels? We have Hyundai. And every month, Hyundai spent 7 billion a month, and it lost 80 billion. And it was a big failure for these big conglomerates in Korea. So whether it be a big company or a small company, if anyone is interested, we would welcome their interest. And if we do not have such interest, then we can start with something small, like a ferry boat. So if it can be a ferry boat with a national flag, then we can provide support so that it can take root and so that we can expand the industry. And the reason why we emphasize the need to have this home port, well, in order to have national vessels, we need to have a market. First, we have to have a home port so that we can drive demand, because supply can drive demand. So in the case of China, we already saw such a case, how a small river cruise was expanded to hundreds or thousands of vessels, and it is planning to attract as many as 30,000 travelers. Then that brings about the necessity to have a cruise ship. So when it comes to the LNG vessel, 70 or 80% of this is monopolized. But when it comes to cruise ships, well, there are not many cruise ships around the world. So let's say that we have a home port with cruise vessels, and with demand increasing as a result, that will actually create a market. So China saw this as a strategic industry. Building a cruise industry and building a cruise ship is a high-tech industry that can be more high-tech than building an aircraft. Well, the Z aircraft that was created with more than 160 seats, and considering Boeing and Airbus, a few players in the air industry, and now we're turning our eyes to the cruise industry, and all the starting point will be the very existence of a home port. Thank you. Thank
두
you.
번째 질문이 이제 코스타 크루즈의 아마 전세
So the second question was about the chartered cruise lines run by Costa Cruise, most of the passengers being Korean. Thank you for your comment. The basic concept is Italy at sea for our cruise ships. So we want to be the Italy on sea and provide a opportunity for the passengers to enjoy the Italian culture on our ships. And when we leave Korea, the biggest strong point is Italy you meet in the seas of Busan. So the domestic passengers on board could enjoy the Italian culture. To help provide language support, we have hired many Korean crew members who are on board. We do have some Korean contents, but by offering Italian contents, we want to have our passengers enjoy the Italian culture. So that's a very idea of our cruise programs. And we run charter cruises because the time period is very short. But for truly Korean cruise ships to operate, we need a more prolonged operation period. And when more cruise ships leave Korea, because the charter period is very short, it is not easy to attract fly-in cruises. But in the case of Taiwan, from April to September, if we can continue to attract a series of cruises on a time lease type of charters, then I think fly-in cruises can fully be attracted to Korean ports. And as Professor Shim said, if we have a national cruise ships, not only Italy on sea, but Korea on sea program could be available to operate in Europe. Thank you. Thank you. I hope that was sufficient as an answer. Any other comments, questions? Yes. This will be the last question and comment from the floor.
예, 안녕.
Good afternoon. I'm with KMI. My name's Hwang. Thank you very much for the presentation. Well, some of the points really resonated with me, and I loved the discussion that we had. Still, well, it's not that I'm not satisfied with the presentations or discussions, but, well, I feel really unfortunate about the current status of the Korean cruise industry. The topic of today's session is a home port and how we can create a home port. I believe that this was already mentioned. Home port is where the cruise ships embark and start their journey, and we can either build our own vessels or we can charter vessels. And we did have the experience of chartered vessels, and we do not have any national vessels at the moment. And when we do the comparison of cruise industry with Taiwan, with similar size of population and economy, we believe that we are lagging behind in terms of this cruise industry. So about whether we should have these national vessels, I hope that we can advance this discussion regarding how to build national vessels so that we can be more competitive. So what would be your input about building our national vessels? And I don't know if I'm in the right position to raise this up, but at Costa, this cruise industry, well, there was this suggestion that the cruise industry now can be led by the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism because it has good enough budget. So, well, when we had a legislation regarding the cruise industry back in 2017, the Ministry of Fisheries and the Ministry of Culture were involved, and the overall responsibility fell on the Ministry of Fisheries because cruise industry is something that happens in the sea, and we need the infrastructure like the port. And once something takes its foot on land, then it is subject to the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism, for instance. And what we want to create is, well, to create an environment where people can get on and get off the boat conveniently. So regarding this second, I believe that there's more thing that the Ministry of Fisheries can do. So thank you. That was both comment/question. So Professor Shim, any thoughts? Well, I didn't quite catch the name from Pesta, but anyway, that is a great idea because, well, it should be handled by someone who has money. Well, it kind of echoes the sound echoes, so I didn't quite get it very clearly, but just like Dr. Huang mentioned, we do need the infrastructure that is related to the Ministry of Fisheries. But I believe that there is a way, instead of just passing the buck, well, the Ministry of Fisheries for leisure, well, the budget is for this year is about 130 billion won for this year. So some of the budget can be taken and be shifted for cruise, and maybe you can do that. But if that fails to happen, then maybe we can go to the National Assembly, have a protest, or maybe have some lobbying activities. So that's why I showed you all the numbers regarding the budget, and we're not saying that the fisheries ministers can deal with this everything. Well, I'm grateful that the person from this fisheries ministry is staying with us throughout the session. So whoever it is, anyone who shows interests in this business should be welcomed by us because they will help us to start this business, and we should be ready to provide support for them. Like I said, we already created this parking lot, but we don't want others to park their cars in our parking garage. So if you think about the case of China, well, all the way to building their own vessels, well, I wish we could have more time, but anyway, I hope that answers your question. But would you like to add a few comments? Yes. Well, we talked about 1 trillion versus 800 million. And this 1 trillion or 1.5 trillion is not really fully for oceans. in. For the fisheries ministries, these are majorly for the infrastructure projects. And this 1.5 trillion regarding the investment in cruise terminals, I don't think the cultural ministry is capable of doing that because they are not supposed to be engaged in the infrastructure-related projects. And port sales, establishment of infrastructure, support for shipping lines, these are what we do. And what the cultural ministry does is, once passengers get off the ships, they're responsible for that process. And after the pandemic, the CIQ was strengthened a lot. So we did have a lot of struggles in order to ease the CIQ. And of course, we got the support from the Justice Ministry and the Korean CDC and other related agencies. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for actively sharing with us your input. Well, with this theme, the home port, I expected that this topic of national vessels would come up. And of course, we have to talk about the infrastructure and the governance. I believe that we can grow out of these discussions. And I hope that we can continue to have such discussions in an in-depth manner. So with that, I'd like to thank you for staying with us throughout the session. Thank you very much. And also, I'd like to appreciate Valerie's presence as well. Thank you.
네, 참석자 여러분.
Please stay on the stage so that we can take a group photo. Thank you.